Okay, so really quickly, what are developers using AI for? Well, there's tons of different tasks that developers are picking up AI to do. Things like app ideation and planning. I don't know how many times I've, talked with Cursor's my um, my weapon of choice, but I don't know how many times I've talked to Cursor with the word brainstorm. Let's brainstorm this new thing, right? So, app ideation and planning, bootstrapping new project code, getting dependencies set up, getting a database um, you know a database model setup, things like that, writing code for new features, debugging, refactoring, reviewing code in PRs. This is something that Garrison actually goes over a little bit in his course. It's really interesting how AI can not only help us write new code, but it can also kind of inject itself in other portions of the development lifecycle. Writing unit and integration tests, testing was really tedious for me and has been for a long time. So much so that in some cases I choose not to do it when I really should have, and don't have nearly the code coverage that I should. But given the right parameters and the right code to look at, I find that AI is really good at writing unit tests. It's really great at explaining existing code. Even learning from real world code. Try this little exercise sometime. Go to one of the open source libraries that you admire or that you use, and just grab some code from it. Like grab the uh, raw of a file in GitHub and throw that into an LLM and ask them to explain to you how it actually works. I've found myself learning some really interesting concepts by just throwing um, real world production code from people I admire into those LLMs. Great for writing documentation, migrating dependencies to new major versions, converting logic from one language to another. I've actually done this with Vue components, changing them to a React component. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's given me so much more confidence in being able to work in frameworks that I never felt comfortable in before. So yeah, converting components from one framework to another, writing less human-friendly code like regexes. I've used it's not perfect, but it gets me a lot of the way there, using AI to write a regex for me, and then asking it to write tests to validate that regex, and then kind of looping between those two things until I get the output that I want. Things like rapid prototyping, quickly copying designs. So this is just a good list of things that I've seen other developers using AI for, or things I myself have done with AI. So how are developers in the current landscape interacting with AI? I think this is really important to understand and kind of gauge where you're at on this spectrum and where other members of your team are at on this spectrum, because it can help you see kind of what else you can push to adopt next, right? It can help you see where to go from here. So this is what I like to call the AI assistance spectrum. Okay. So level one of this AI assistance spectrum, and this is to describe how developers are using AI. Level one of this AI assistance spectrum is using browser-based AI chats. This is the easiest way to get started, of course, with AI. It's great for planning and research. And actually, I do a fair amount of planning and research inside of ChatGPT. There's nothing wrong with me as a developer jumping out of Cursor and going into one of these browser-based interfaces for an LLM. I know some developers who are like, oh, that's what the lay people do. That's what the people who aren't developers do. But it really does still have great use cases, right? ChatGPT is a great brainstorming partner. But level one is where developers really get stuck here, is they stay in the browser. And really, the biggest downside of this is the context is limited to what you put in. right? So moving up to level 2 in the AI assistance spectrum is adopting AI as an in-context co-pilot, right? That's things like chat inside of Cursor or VS Code, GitHub Copilot, just kind of where you're asking questions about the code that you're working with, or having inline autocomplete. We've all seen this. This has been around for quite a while now, but this I would consider to be a fairly base level usage of AI. Okay, in level 2. So the benefit of level 2, though, over level 1 is that now we have more context about the projects we're actually working on. These tools like GitHub Copilot and Cursor can smartly add that context based on an indexed code base. By the way, inside of the AIDD course, one of the or the masterclass, one of the courses I'm working on right now is how to implement a RAG pipeline and use it to augment generation with your own data, maybe company proprietary data, maybe just data specific to the use case you're working with. That same type of RAG pipeline that I teach you how to build inside of the AIDD course is actually what's powering the the search, the retrieval capabilities inside of tools like Cursor and GitHub Copilot. It's how those tools know how to pull in the relevant context. Okay, so it's very real, very powerful stuff. And this in-context AI Copilot also takes into account custom rules saved within the repo, and the developer still retains a very high level control at level 2 of the AI assistant spectrum. Okay. Level 3 of this spectrum, though, is what I like to call supervised agentic coding, or what the CEO of Perplexity called flow. In other words, AI is given goals to achieve and tools to execute those goals, and then you kind of let it go, right? This is essentially using agent mode in something like GitHub Copilot or Cursor, or using Claude and sitting there and watching it, as it goes through and checking it as it's writing, right? In this level, AI is given some more freedom to act on its own, while there's still a human there to provide attentive feedback. As soon as you see it going off the rails, you can hit the stop button and you can intervene and get it back on track, right? That's what I consider to be level 3 of this AI assistant spectrum. And then we have level 4. Okay, this is where we get into autonomous agents that run all by themselves. They're not necessarily supervised. You really only check up on them at the very end. These agents are given a goal. It's a well-laid plan. It's something that's more than a sentence or two, probably several paragraphs or more, with maybe some lists in there about, hey, these are the things I want done. Okay. And they're given tools. Tools are extremely, extremely important in this level of the AI assistant spectrum. Why? Because that autonomous agent must have a way to get feedback in order to course correct, right? The really cool part here is that these autonomous agents can be run in parallel. I have had some success with that. My success is limited compared to the success of some other people. So results may vary, right? But that is the future, I think. It's where we're headed as developers. I don't think it's 100% there right now, but I think level 4 is really where we want to be eventually. Okay? Professionally and just as a whole. What's the word I'm looking for? As a profession, right? So what I want to ask you now in honest introspection is, what level of this AI assistant spectrum are you currently at? What have you been so bold to actually adopt? Feel free to throw it in the chat if you want. I'm not going to make you do that, but I do think it's important for you to truly ask yourself, which level are you at? And if you're not at maybe level 3 or and even dabbling there in level 4, I think you're a little bit behind. Okay? I'm just being perfectly honest. I think you need to be fairly comfortable with level 3 at this point in time, and you need to be dabbling and aiming to get to level 4. All right? So just to give a little better idea of level 3, some of the tools that are available for use in level 3, things like Cursor, GitHub Copilot, JetBrains IDE with Junie, Windsurf, Klein, Rue Code, all of these things that you can give it a task, but still keep an eye on it as it's working. CLIs can be used in both level 4 and level 3, but some of them are listed here. You've also got some web-based tools that I think also kind of fall into this level 3 category. Um, and then some of the tools for these autonomous agents that I personally like. Cursor background agents is something that I've found some good success with. The thing I like about Cursor background agents over something like Claude Code, yes, I think you can use Claude Code as an autonomous agent that works totally in the background, but I think there's more security concerns with that because it still all runs on your machine. Now, of course, you could run Claude Code on a remote machine, and then I think you're one step further to a better workflow. But Cursor background agents, they run on a remote machine by default. So there's a lot less surface area of risk for that agent going rogue and stealing information outside of the project that's on your current machine. Of course, Claude Code has breaks and stops and protections in there too, but a lot of that relies on you giving it access, you giving it permissions. I think the ability to run these agents on a remote server is a huge plus for security. And that's something that Cursor background agents gives you out of the box. So I really like Cursor background agents. Okay. So that is the quick high level overview. Just checking my time here. Don't have a lot of time left. Man, that moved faster than I thought it did. Okay, I'm going to try to be quick. So some quick prompt engineering and AI agent tips for developers, i.e. some ways that I've made Cursor work better for me. So some general prompting tips that I have found helpful. We'll start by listing out some simple rules and then take a look at a more practical use case, like case study example of these rules in action. Okay. So as Phil mentioned a little earlier on, prompting as a whole is dead, but I think you still need to know some general best practices. And these are ways that Cursor is made better for me. Okay. So provide examples. Provide examples when you're trying to get agents to do something. They have these terms called zero shot, which is no example, one shot, which is one example, and then few shot, which is several examples. Okay. I've found that for a lot of use cases, one shots work great. Providing no example over or providing one example over no example usually produces the best results. For few shot, several examples, these are things that often live inside of my rules files, right? I'm going to skip past those there for the sake of time. But another prompting rule that has been very helpful for me is using XML to group concerns. This is something that actually comes directly from Anthropic's prompting guide, and I found it applies pretty well in terms of coding use cases as well. So I don't know how many times I'll find myself copying and pasting, something from somewhere on the internet into my code and putting it inside of these brackets to say, hey, these are the docs that I was referring to, or something like that. Yeah, markdown headings also are good for grouping. Cursor rules, whatever your flavor is. These past two tips, honestly, are even more useful in those rules files than directly inside of prompts. I don't think we need a further explanation on cursor rules. don't let AI start from scratch every single time. We're going shotgun approach here, going through a lot at one time. Don't let AI start from scratch every single time. Start with existing libraries, frameworks, tools that have been vetted by human beings, and tell the AI about those, and let the AI use those responsibly. Okay. Um, Another way that you can not start from scratch, or not let the AI start from scratch, is give it a way to generate things from a template. Okay, this is something I've found to be quite successful. One thing I've done in a few little apps is download a CLI tool called Hygen. There are other alternatives to this. Hygen is a bit abandoned at this time, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend this at this point. But there are alternatives, but this has worked for me for a long time. And what this Hygen allows me to do is actually create some templates, and then I can just tell my AI agents to use those templates and start from those starting places, so that it kind of knows the pattern of things, the patterns within my project, and it doesn't start from scratch. So since agents can run commands, just make sure your cursor rules know about the different Hygen commands that you have available and when they are useful. Mention files as examples a lot. Like, this is maybe even the biggest thing. If, let's say you want to add a calendar component to your application, you could say just add a calendar component, right? That works sometimes. And if you have a thinking model, it might even, crawl through your other components and kind of see some patterns that you're used to using. And in that case, it might work. But a better prompt might be create a calendar component and read 2 to 3 of the existing component files for inspiration, especially at whatever this other component is that I think is very similar, right? And in this case, you might even be able to reduce your model power, right? Use something like Auto as opposed to Claude Sonnet, and save a little money, but still get a good output. You'll have to play with that and tweak it a little bit for your needs. But I found that pointing it to good examples, if you already know in your head what a good example is, then why not just go ahead and mention it and save, some thinking power on the AI side. Limit your request scope. Don't ask for the full-on app with all the bells and whistles. Go one step at a time. Why? Because you have control issues? No, because when you ask for a scoped and limited result, we've talked about this already, I think, the AI does things quite well. If you can define a very definitive output, what the result needs to be, it actually does things quite well. So if you define an output that's vague or way too overblown, then the AI touches a lot of different aspects of that request, but usually never completes any of them adequately. So limit your request scope. Okay, so very quickly here, let's take a look at a use case example of some of these prompting tips. Here is a simple blog. All right, this is a blog application that I booted up with AI not too long ago. Okay, and typically I like to start by brainstorming as my initial prompt. Since this was a blog and a pretty common project, I did just go ahead and skip this step. By the way, yes, I know a blog is pretty simple, but I've used the same or similar rules in other larger production contexts successfully. Just the scope of keeping it something simple everybody understands is often better for teaching, and that's why I choose to do that. Okay, so here's my prompt to start out this blog. First, I want to create a dummy blog. I want to store a post in a database table. Could you help me set up the schema and the seeds? All right, and then I point to the database .mdc file. So this is my rules for working with the database. I'm still kind of in control. I'm telling it what I want it to do, right? And notice I'm also limiting the scope to just the database concerns. I'm not saying boot up the database. I'm being specific about what I want. Help me set up the schema and the seeds so that it doesn't make up its own agenda. Okay. This is the database rules for this prompt, by the way. So this project uses Drizzle as a database RRM. The schema can be found here. On the server side, you can call an auto-imported useDB function in order to interact with that database, and seeds should only be created as Nitro tasks. So notice how my rules files are very specific to the patterns within my project, right? But also notice they're very simple. Here we have a one-shot example of how it should create a seed. And up here, we're not explaining what Drizzle is. We're not, we're not explaining what a Nux task is. We're being very simple, and we're expecting that the LLM is trained enough on what these different libraries do externally, these popular libraries, and really scoping it down to just what's unique about our project, right? If you find that there's a gap in the LLM's knowledge about some open source tool you're using, that's when you decide to add in a rule, okay? Not before. Okay, what was the result? Well, I got a TS error, unfortunately, but that was easily fixed by hand after a couple of failed attempts from the AI. Then I was able to DrizzleKit push, DrizzleKit Studio, and I had my database set up. Okay, took just a few minutes. So that was 2 prompts, 1 manual fix, about 10 minutes worth of work. This is something that probably would have taken me, I don't know, 20, 30, maybe even 40 minutes doing it all by hand. This is something I want to emphasize to people is AI isn't a magic bullet, right? It's not just going to do everything for you. A lot of people come in thinking, they're going to build this production-worthy app in a few prompts. No. But scoping things down and these wins turning 20, 30, 40 minutes into 10 minutes, like that's not trivial. That's a huge win, right? And that's what I find AI to be really good at. Okay, so for some API endpoints, I'm going to stop after just a couple more slides because we are short on time, but I want to get through this one here. So for the API endpoints, I said, okay, forget the TS issue because I fixed it. This is something I found that is important when working with an agent in Cursor. Sometimes you got to tell it, hey, I fixed this. It's changed. Don't worry about it. Okay. I manually did that. Otherwise, it'll try and go off and fix it again itself because something's different. Now let's set up the API endpoints for each of these post resources. Give me the full CRUD operations. And I mentioned a specific rules file that deals with my preferences for MVC or for APIs. Okay, and so this is what that API rules file looks like. All API endpoints follow the OpenAI specification. When creating new resources like users, posts, etc., use the following command to bootstrap all the CRUD API endpoints. So notice how I'm using that template approach here to get the files started that the AI can then just fill in based on the use case. Okay. Always read the created files after running the hygiene command. And if you need to create any API endpoint that supports streaming, don't use one of the hygiene commands. Anyways, just exceptions there. Okay. And my result after a single prompt, because I used a template with a placeholder content in it for Open API documentation, I immediately had not only a working API route, but I also had documentation, Swagger-based documentation for that API route. So this is one of the big differences between like vibe coding and an AI-driven dev, right? We as developers know that there are things beyond just making it work that are important. There are things like documenting things along the way, things like making API docs, and you want to bake those kinds of concerns into your AI interactions, right? And that's what I was able to do there with Cursor. Okay, great. Going through the rest of these slides just really quickly, I will share these on my social media after the event. So if you do want to look into these other ones, you can take a look at them because I think they are super useful. But yeah, for the sake of time, I just don't want to hold up the other speakers. So just a few miscellaneous prompting tips that I've heard or experienced before I leave you. Number one, just ask if the AI is familiar with the technology before you ask it to develop with that, right? You may know a certain tech stack, top and bottom, and so therefore you start out with that stack in mind. But it may not be something that LLM has really been trained on. So you need to vet up front, is the AI going to be helpful in this stack, right? And really kind of gear yourself towards something that the LLM can be more helpful with. Um, Honestly, at this point, I think it's more important that the LLM be familiar with the stack than necessarily you be familiar with it. Now, well, I won't go into that. You get the idea. Make sure the LLM is familiar with your stack. Okay. Checklists for complex tasks. This is built into a lot of IDEs now. Add links to GitHub READMEs. Use context 7. Anything you can do to get the context into the agent. Use NI to avoid mix-ups about package managers. I've adopted this wholesale. It's made my workflow easier, not just with agents, but even just personally with me typing in the command line. I don't have to remember, am I using PNPM? Am I using NPM? Am I using Yarn? Maybe this is more of a me problem because I work on a lot of different, educational kind of projects, and maybe you're just working on one or two at work. But NI is like a replacement that just automatically detects which package manager is being used for that project, and it does the thing in the proper, with the proper command. So I actually even have this as a global rule inside of my user rules in Cursor. So you can create rules inside of Cursor that apply to every single project that exists under the Cursor rules page, then the rules and memories tab, and these user rules right here are applied to every single project that you work on. Okay, so I just tell it use knee and then tell it a little bit about how knee works. So we already talked about that. I've heard a lot of people say using TDD, asking agents to use TDD works really well. I haven't really tried that myself, but I've heard a lot of good things. Do use TypeScript and ESLint as much as possible. Why? Well, because these tools bring relevant context to the agents at just the right time. These ESLint rules, these TypeScript, type checking, they're so much more. They're so much better than just rules files alone because they bring the context at the exact right time, right? So learn TypeScript if you don't know TypeScript. Install ESLint. Even create your own custom ESLint rules for specific project patterns. I've experimented with this a little bit as well, and it works decently. Okay, let's move through because we are almost out of time here. Yep. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for your time. If you did enjoy this talk or this event at all, we'd love to hear from you on Trustpilot. Us here at Bitter Brains at AIDD, we'd love to get your feedback there. I will provide a link to this in the chat shortly after I get off of stage. Thank you all very much for joining my talk, and I look forward to the next one. All right. All right, I'm going to just grab one quick question here from the chat. Once again, because of time. Yeah. Ba, 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 ba. Okay. Uh, Clarification on the AIDD course. Is the content set or will it still evolve in the future? And will the insiders get access to the updates without additional purchases? That's a great question. Yes, we will keep the content within that AIDD masterclass fresh in so much as um, in so much that if content changes that we have produced and something is out of date and something is no longer accurate, we will give you better solutions, and we will update those to the latest things. But we won't necessarily just continue adding new courses, forever for all the new tools and things like that. Right. So we will strive to keep it up to date and accurate. But the next gen dev platform as a whole is really an expansion of AIDD, and we will forever be adding like new content there for for new tools for exciting new things like that. I hope that makes sense. Okay. All right. Checking my chat here. Yes, I will of course share my slides. So I will add it in the chat. I am Daniel Kelly underscore IO on Twitter or X. Twitter is really where I'm most active. I'll share my slides there on Twitter, as well as if you just search for Daniel Kelly, like View School or Bitter Brains on LinkedIn, you can find me there as well. I'll share my slides there too.